Robert Hughes, The Fatal Shore. In 1787, the 28th year of the reign of King George III, the British government sent a fleet to colonise Australia. Never had a colony been found so far from its parent state, or in such ignorance of the land it occupied. There had been reconnaissance. In 1770, Captain James Cook had made landfall on the unexplored east coast of this utterly enigmatic continent, stopped for a short while at a place called Botany Bay, and then gone north again. Since then, no ship had called, not a word, not an observation, for 17 years, each one of which was exactly like the thousands that had preceded it, locked in its historical immensity of blue heat, bush, sandstone, and the measured booming of glassy Pacific rollers. Now this coast was to witness a new colonial experiment never tried before, not repeated since. An unexplored continent would become a jail. The space around it, the very air and sea, the whole transparent labyrinth of the South Pacific would become a war 14,000 miles thick. The late 18th century abounded in schemes of social goodness, thrown off by its burgeoning sense of revolution. But here the process was to be reversed. Not utopia, but dystopia. Man coerced, exiled, decrassinated, in chains. In the most sanguine moments, the authorities hoped that it would eventually swallow a whole class, the criminal class, whose existence was one of the prime sociological beliefs of late Georgian and early Victorian England. Australia was settled to defend English property not from the frog-eaten invader across the Channel, but from the marauder within. English lawmakers wished not only to get rid of the criminal class, but if possible, forget about it. Australia was invisible, its contents filthy and unnameable. To most Englishmen, this seemed not just a mutant society, but another planet, an exiled world, summed up in its popular name Botany Bay. It was remote and anomalous to its white creators. It was strange but close, as the unconscious to the conscious mind. There was as yet no such thing as Australian history or culture. For its first 40 years, everything that happened in the thief colony was English. In the whole period of convict transportation, the Crown shipped more than 160,000 men, women and children in bondage to Australia. This was the largest forced exile of citizens at the behest of a European government in pre-modern history. On the 18th of January 1788, the first fleet sailed into Botany Bay. Those on board were not free settlers looking to establish a home, but were convicts under the command of Arthur Phillip, a retired naval officer. They had been transported 5,000 miles in a journey that took at least 6 months to serve the sentences in a new continent, establishing a new British colony in the process. The 11 ships sailed into Botany Bay in good order, having survived the passage of 252 days, with no ships lost and only 69 deaths, discharges or desertions within the entire fleet, which carried over 1,400 people, including convicts, seamen, marines and a number of small civil officials. Having landed and following their instructions from London, they discovered that Botany Bay lacked both water and salt. Also, so they set out sail again on January the 26th up the coast to Port Jackson, landing at Sydney Cove, a far more suitable venue for a settlement, and a new colony was founded. The little was known about the new continent that the strangely assorted group found themselves on had been recorded by Cook's expedition, which had returned to London in 1771, 17 years before. Governor Phillip read aloud to the entire company the Act of Parliament founding the colony and his commission as governor on February the 7th, 1788. For the convicts it must have been obvious that they would live and die in this new unfamiliar place 5,000 miles away from their former homes. For Phillip, the immensity of this task in establishing a settlement, dependent upon his supplies and the promise of relief ships in 2 years, all being well, must have been nearly overwhelming. To grasp of exile to such a placement, one must think of the size of the world in the late 18th century, so much faster than today. In the 1780s, most of the world was still unknown to Europeans. The outlines of all the continents barring Australia and Antarctica had been traced. In profile, it has today's shape, but an immense blank slate behind the coast. North America was a populated eastern fringe tacked onto millions of square miles of wilderness. The interiors of South America, Asia and Africa were scarcely explored. No Europeans had ever visited the high Himalaya, the fountains of the Nile, or the poles, while the Pacific Basin, to all except the most educated Englishmen in the 1780s, was the least imaginable of all.